as I said, my name is John Feffer, and I work with the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, D.C. We are a progressive think tank, and I direct the Foreign Policy in Focus project as well as the Global Just Transition project. And I'm delighted to welcome everybody here, our presenters, of course, but also those of you in the audience, to a session on a new mapping project. And as a way of introducing this mapping project, I'll just note that we are obviously at a very important juncture, as we always are, an important juncture in global history. And we are focusing with this map on Chinese investments, of course, in extraction, infrastructure, critical raw materials throughout the global south. And, you know, one of the focuses of this map, of course, is on critical minerals or transition minerals, but should recognize that these minerals are critical not only for an energy transition away from dirty energy and toward clean energy, but also, as we know, in traditional manufacturing. Cobalt, lithium, rare earth elements, also very important in the production of military products, for instance. But what characterizes our current geopolitical moment, of course, is greater tensions among countries for access to those minerals and those critical resources, especially the two largest economies, the United States and China. But of course, there are other countries involved because plenty of countries are engaged in the manufacturing and extraction of these critical raw materials. But what also characterizes this moment, in addition to the tensions between the two largest economies, the United States and China, is that these products are also viewed often as a path to greater economic development by countries throughout the world, and as a way of advancing higher in the supply chain, with not only the extraction but perhaps the processing and the use of those materials in manufacturing. All of that is background to this particular project. And about a year ago, we came together in Washington, D.C. to have a conversation about critical resources and the competition between the United States and China. And it was a day and a half long conversation. And at the end of it, we came up with 3 different projects we wanted to work on together. And this was at the top of the list. It was a project that would look at increasing competition for these products in the global south, and mapping this competition, if you will, but perhaps most importantly, looking at how communities in the global south have responded to mining, to new port construction, to new road construction, to agricultural production, especially Chinese investments. And we partnered with the fabulous Environmental Justice Atlas, which has an incredible number of researchers who are able to not only investigate and research into these examples of investments around the world, but provide visual evidence, what it looks like, with a map and with pictures associated with it. So we have produced this map together along with a report, and I'll put those in the chat for people to follow up on. And today we're going to look at this map from a variety of different angles, with both an overview, but also kind of drilling down into a couple of specific cases, and then also getting a picture of what Chinese investments and the trajectory of Chinese investments is and will likely be. We're joined by 5 fabulous people who are going to talk with us today, and I'm going to give you their information right now, and then when they begin to talk, I'll put the information in the chat so you can be reminded of who people are. We're going to start out with Mariana Walter, and she's a member of the Direction and Coordination Group of Environmental Justice Atlas, or EJAtlas, based in Spain. And she will give us an overview of the map. And then she'll be followed by Maia Seeger, the director of Sustentarse in Chile. And Maia gave a presentation actually on this map at the most recent COP, and she did so virtually, but it was apparently a great success, the whole side meeting at the COP. And then following Maia, we'll be joined by Edwin Alejandro, who's the socio-environmental coordinator of the Muqui network, which is in Peru. Following Edwin, Zhao, who's the chairman of the board for Green Camel Bell, which is a grassroots environmental NGO which he founded in northwest China, and he's currently a visiting scholar at the Department of Sociology at Colorado State University. And then last but not least, Paulina Garzon, who's the director of Latinoamérica Sustentable, and she goes back and forth between here and Ecuador, where the organization is based. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Mariana, and thank you, Mariana, for joining us.
Thank you, John. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Hola a todas y todos. I will be speaking in English, and I will share screen because I wanted to share with all of you actually a collaborative work we developed, as John was mentioning, with the Atlas, Sustentarse, Latinoamérica Sustentable, AREG, which is Action and Research for Environmental Justice, which is an organization related that supports the work in the Atlas, and the Institute for Policy Studies, where John is based. And I just want to start saying that I was part of this collaborative mapping, but also Roberto Cantoni, Raquel Neira, Joan Martinez Allier, and Marcel Llavero Pasquina from the Environmental Justice Atlas, that they have all supported this process from the Environmental Justice Atlas team. So before starting to show this specific feature map we developed in this collective effort, I wanted to give you like a broader overview of what we see in the Environmental Justice Atlas. And before starting, because we have embedded this feature map in the Atlas, it's important that you know that the cases we document in the Atlas and in this feature map are cases that fulfill three key criteria. First, these are environmental justice struggles, mobilizations related with to a specific economic activity of legislation that has or could have negative environmental and social outcomes, impacts. Also, we have these cases involve claim and mobilization by environmental justice organizations. So all these cases involve the active mobilization, protests, expression of concern by different groups locally and maybe in alliance with international groups. And all these cases are reported. So all these cases have at least 2 or more media stories, scientific reports, non-scientific reports that reflect that this struggle is taking place. And just a reminder that these are some of the ongoing multiple struggles that are taking place globally. So actually the Environmental Justice Atlas has more than 4,400 documented struggles, more than that globally. And from all these struggles, 10% of these struggles involve companies that are Chinese investment. These are 10%, more than 430 cases documented in the Atlas, 10% of all the cases we have in the Atlas. And what we can see about where are these cases, these struggles taking place, is that actually China is where they're more concentrated. About 34% of the cases documented in the Atlas that involve Chinese investment, which makes sense, are in China, followed by East Asia, Africa, and Latin America. What we can also see in the Atlas is what are the key economic activities that are fostering these environmental justice struggles. So what we can see is that 23% of the cases we have documented, of these 10% of cases in the atlas, are related to mineral and to metal and mineral extraction, mining conflicts, followed by fossil fuel conflicts, 15% by industrial conflicts, 40% by water management conflicts, which are mostly dams, large-scale infrastructures to manage water. 9% are related to infrastructures and built environment. This is ports, roads, big infrastructures to transport energy, water, resources, and 70% are related to biomass and land conflicts. This is in industrial agriculture, forestry, fisheries, all these activities. And as you can see, we can also explore conflicts related with waste management, nuclear, tourism, biodiversity. But the ones I'm showing here are the most significant considering the sample. What else can we see? And I'm here highlighting some key outcomes of these conflicts. First of all, and something that is not completely surprising, and we will hear more from Muqui about what's happening in Peru, is that many of these conflicts that we have documented in the atlas that involve Chinese investment have, as a result, repression of environmental offenders, 27%. 10% involve the death of environmental defenders. 24% involve displacement of communities because of this development of these projects that are displacement, producing migrations. And 22% involve criminalization. However, and this was interesting and surprising from looking at this group of cases in the atlas, we also find relevant and significant positive outcomes. One which is especially significant is that 24% of the projects documented in the atlas that involve Chinese investment resulted in the temporary suspension of the projects, which is particularly important when we think about the relevance of involving local communities in decision-making process, in participation spaces, because these local actors can actually be critical in suspending these investments. And this has been accounted for in different research. Actually, this involves high costs for the companies, for all the actors in developing this project. So it's really important to highlight the relevance of involving local communities because this can have and has an impact on these projects. In 23% of the cases, we have seen some form of compensation to local communities. And in 19%, we have seen a strengthening of participation, more participation, networking, mobilization, which is also relevant. But I just want to give now Maia the space to explain the specific feature map we developed. But before doing that, and along the lines of what John Feffer was presenting, I think it's really important to highlight that what this collaborative map aims to make visible some of the local impacts and conflicts that are related with increasing global pressures from diverse public and private corporations and states to gain access and control to critical and strategic materials, and also the broader supply chains. Because as we saw, there are many conflicts related with infrastructures, with dams, with energy, infrastructures, and so on. So it's the extraction and also broader supply chains. And actually we are seeing in the atlas, and we are also seeing in this specific sample, how there is an increasing competition and pressures to extract, as we were saying, not only critical materials that are related with this green transition, but food, timber, all kinds of materials that are now are becoming these spaces of struggle. And so we are focusing today on, and John has focused on this China and US competition, but we also see other actors that are feeding this global competition, the EU, Canada, and other countries. And all of these, as we are seeing in the atlas and this map, are fostering this global pressure across the supply chains. And what we are seeing, this exacerbation, especially in the global south, on the environmental justice struggles, mobilizations that resist the development of polluting activities, the violation of human rights that we saw are really current, displacement, and land grabs, among many other concerning processes that are taking place. And just a final note to say that we are presenting today this special map on Chinese investment, but we could be, and we have developed with the Atlas, other maps that have to do with other sensitive companies that are developing many conflicts, that are part of many conflicts around the world: Shell, Chevron, Barrick, Total, Vale, Enel, and many others that actually, if you go to the Atlas, you can see the impact that different corporations are having in the Atlas. And I wanted to highlight that Joan Martinez Alié and Marcel Llavero Pasquina actually developed a specific research analyzing the impacts related with Zhong, which is one of the largest mining companies worldwide that are also being critical in this expansion of extractive projects globally. So I will now let Maia to explain us more about why doing this specific feature map on China, which is a critical actor among others, but it is a critical actor in a global scenario of extractivism and environmental justice struggles. So thank you. And you can, if you want to write a question in the chat, we can also keep on, I can share more details of the data we have in the Atlas. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariana. That was wonderful. I just want to remind people that we do have interpretation in English and in Spanish. And one thing I forgot to mention at the outset is that the purpose of our overall meeting was twofold. One was to diminish competition or conflict between the United States and China, and the second was to reduce sacrifice zones in the global south. So those were the kind of overall directives behind the work. But Maia, please take over and tell us specifically a little bit more about the map we have.
Thank you, John. Hello, everyone. Buenas tardes. Voy a proseguir en español.
Okay, I'm going to continue in Spanish. So here, my idea is to get a little bit closer to you talking about this mapping, collaborative mapping project that was done. So as Mariana already pointed out, that in this project, we mapped out 25 different cases to be able to then systematize the different lessons of involvement with local communities, with projects that involve Chinese investments. And so basically, which had to do with strengthening also social society and organized groups that have to do with these issues, that to be able to share these strategies that have been very successful in some cases and others not so much in the promotion of transparency when about the activities and human rights, and also the negative impacts that you have in different groups. Also, to look through this effort to influence and see what are the impacts of financing and corporate Chinese influence in the global south, where we can see that the pressure for energy transition and other global development are impacting and sacrificing the health or well-being of local communities. And also to increase transparency and accountability, in which we're not complying with the standards, and also companies that have improved their performance. Some of our findings that I think are interesting to share are certain characteristics of companies and Chinese companies, when we talk about in general, that have to do with making their investments or financing. And so the first thing that we see is that they show a high level of tolerance for financial risk, but also environmental risk. So they assume that the projects that nobody wants to do because they are at very high risk. Last week in Chile, the country where I live, it was announced that a subsidiary of China through Georges was going to be building a dam the Sapayar Dam, which has been supported by the communities for a long time. Then another finding was that these projects are oftentimes opaque, where the companies oftentimes don't even have a website, a basic website, and where it's very difficult to find information about businesses and who's running the project, their owners, and other types of basic information. Also, one of the conclusions that we reached was that Chinese companies prefer or focus on government to government relations because of high levels of corruption that are involved. And they give very little importance and very little attention to the involvement and relationship with civil society and affected communities. And then finally, something that's very interesting is that they use tactics to really soft power tactics to prepare the ground before starting an extractive project so they can get the license to operate. So generally speaking, this is something that, for example, they go to different cities and regions. Here we have a quick overview of the Atlas project and specifically the Chinese projects. You can see here a good general overview, but for each one of the cases that we've studied, there is a very detailed description of every case. So here on this map, you can find more than 25 different cases that have been analyzed. We also have several key lessons about things that have worked. So this is the perspective on resilience of communities. So clearly we can see that in this has been the most important part of every project when it comes to resistance and also mobilizations and blocking of roads, and then also protest and sending correspondence to important authorities, like for example, the Chinese embassy. And so we see involvement of organizations from civil society, also at the international level, that have really brought visibility to the conflicts and have lifted them to a level of importance, a national and international level of importance. And then clearly we can see that the legal strategies are very important to increase pressure on companies, which oftentimes, and unfortunately, these strategies are very expensive and they require a lot of economic resources, but they also contribute to gaining justice for the affected communities. And then finally, in these cases in general, we see that these are partial victories because forcing projects to improve their environmental performance or social performance, or oftentimes we can postpone projects for an indefinite amount of time, because over time what we find is that there's many projects that end up being fully canceled. So this high tolerance for risk from the Chinese actors also have negative consequences. So for example, they increase budgets for investment and also operational expenses at the same time we reduce operational costs due to the delay or cancellation of projects or the interruption of the operation. Also, this is something that's very clear and it's really important when we look at investors and business people from China. They give high level of relevance to reputation. And so therefore, if you damage this reputation, it would be a big deal because they're going to be ready to review the projects and to start dialogue procedures. And so basically what we've seen oftentimes is that there are countries who at one point were very open to receiving reception in Chinese financing, but today we see is that public opinion has changed to the effect that, and because of the bad experiences that they've had that have had a high level of impact and have not been very transparent, so that willingness is changing. But it is important for China, people involved with China to see this. And when it comes to recommendations for China, it would be not only to have, full compliance, perfect compliance with the different social and environmental regulations, but also when it so happens to apply the highest social and environmental regulations, especially like in Latin America and the Southern Cone, to conduct accurate impact assessments and secure free and informed prior consent from targeted communities, as well as the rights that communities have to participate in the decisions that relate to projects, to establish grievance mechanisms, and to respect the right to protest, but avoiding any sort of repression and by the state and also by the company. And also to provide full transparency about the nature of the projects and the finance connected to those projects and the entities involved in all in local language. So, for example, we'd have to see, what's the reporting that's behind each case. So I think this is something that, John, we stopped at. And when we got up to this page, it's available so that for now, I understand that we're going to have a translation into Spanish. And then finally, what I wanted to tell you is that in today's meeting, there are 3 different Latin American organizations that are part of a network of civil society actors that look at Chinese investments when it comes to the environment in Latin America. And we have done a very rigorous job over the last couple of years to follow up on this type of expense. And so I will now leave the floor to the next panelist.
Thank you, Maya. That was excellent overview of our and the details of our report. Now we're going to turn to Edwin Alejandro, and Edwin is part of a network, Muqui network in Peru, and he's going to drill down even further into a specific case. Edwin, welcome.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this invitation. Very interested for us to present this case of vulneration of human rights from a part of this company. This happened in Mocha, which was impacting this area by the company Chinalco. I belong to the Muqui network. We have 32 organizations that work helping communities to see these cases about mining. So this case is an emblematic case because it's a mega project about cobalt. Has a high capacity, almost 170 tons per day. So this has generated a lot of social and economical and environmental problems in the Mataro River and the community of Mococha. So this is the first case. And how this is originated, how is this displacement originated? This company Chinalco gets this project in 2007. And then in 2010, it's approved the study of environmental impact, but it's limiting the participation of the community that is affected. And then we initiate a process of a reassessment of more than 5,000 people that coming back to this to initiate this project. So this project, as I said, is one of the government's more important project and the most significant for China, an investment of $6,000 million. So the development has put it comes with a high cost for the communities that have faced a systematic destruction, losing their economy, destruction of basic services like water, education, health, etc., and the systematic degradation of the quality of life and the balance of the ecology balance. And this is one of the best, most important regions in Peru. So then when you revise these instruments in 2010, the impact, it had about more than 5,000 people living here population. Then they use a mechanism in the case of Peru to do technical reports to sustain, and then to prolong this mega project, it, the studies of environmental impact are modified. And then with the COVID-19, it was really harder for the community to participate because communities didn't have internet and they couldn't access these processes, how they are extending this project. So the conditions for participation are limited. So as you can see, here is the mega proyecto Promocho, more than 5,000 people that have been, their environment has been destroyed. And this area also, it's 15 kilometers from here. Also, there's an area important where the conditions that we have observed, because they are in risk of flooding and other impact on environmental conditions. Why is the community saying the conditions are no good, or why they don't trust this company? Because in 2010, when they approved the study of this environmental impact, they committed to a lot of things, but they have not fulfilled these promises towards the community. The first one, for example, to initiate operations only when they have finished to bring all these people back, all the population back. So they haven't been able to do this because even until September of this year, some communities, some people have been thrown out even by police force. So to ubicate the workers' camp near to the city to promote the integration of social integration and labor integration, not this hasn't happened because they have taken all these people near to the mining operations. So to fulfill that social commitment, they have not been able to do this, to guarantee also the special conditions for home and economical development for these families. So they want to ubicate these people and isolate these people to other regions that have they don't have the same conditions that they had before. For example, people that are also more vulnerable, the children, older people, and this has not been fulfilled, and it is in this document of environmental administration. Also, we can say that Chinalco have used a mechanism together with the Peruvian state, which is expropriation of a private land to give to these companies. So 34 hectares where this district was localized, they had all the documentation for ownership by the district part, and there was a law also that it was put there to mitigate the impact, the global impact. So these 34 hectares in this area, the Macocha, they have been passed to this mining company. So this has also been into the constitutional tribunal where the community says there cannot be expropriation, kind of like under a law that is not helping people. So they have asked to the superintendency of mining actives from the Peruvian state. So immediately, and in record time, they signed a contract of transfer of these 34 hectares in favor of the Chinalco company. So this is a land reaching copper, and that's where these people lived, and it has been expropriated, these 34 hectares. By other thing is the contamination of water and environmental contamination, pollution is very, very grave. And some of the people have been showing, for example, kids that have hormone in their blood, and the water is transported by a tunnel from Chinalco operations through the river. So finally, to displacement of these families until 2025, from 2010 to 2005, when the study was approved, they told they were going to bring these people back and put these people back into the land, but that this has not been fulfilled. These people are living in a very bad conditions, no water, no electricity, no roads, and leaving these explosions and everything that it's affecting their health. So finally, September 19 of 2025, these last 5 families were displaced without any judicial statement, only with a cautelar measurement, and these reparation measurements have not been done, and Chinalco has actually used trucks with no plates to unknown places. So these families are vulnerable with nothing, with no home, and they're not protected, not protected by the state and not protected by the company. So this is how Chinalco is acting in these processes and how they vulnerate their rights. And that's how the process is going and what it's cost for these people, these communities by Chinalco company.
Thank you, Edwin. That was really an important contribution about the situation in this mining project, Toromocho, and the displacement of so many people in this village high up in the mountains of Peru. And obviously we have a map. It looks very abstract. There are just little points on the map, but now we see that each little point is a story, and actually many stories of many people who are affected by investments, and in this case, a copper mine in Peru. So thank you, Edwin, for that. We are now going to go to Zhao, who is going to give us a kind of an overview of Chinese investment strategies. Obviously, we have the Belt and Road Initiative, which is a global network of Chinese investments all around the world. And Zhong's going to give us a little bit of a picture of what this is and maybe where this Belt and Road is going. And I'll thank you so much for joining us, Zhong.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. And I'm Zhao from Green Camel. Today, I would like to just introduce the evolution of the Belt Road Initiative and the BRR policies, especially regarding to the green investment policies. And we will take a quick journey through the BRR's background and the 2 main phases of its gone through and some challenges it has faced, and also a concrete case study, and finally what the future might we look like. And so the Belt Road Initiative and was was proposed by Chinese President Xi Jinping, and in 2013, then Belt Road Initiative as economical diplomacy became a new banner for China's push for globalization and connectivities. Its main goal is to promote cooperation across 5 areas: policy coordination, infrastructure connectivity, trade facilitation, financial cooperation, and cultural exchange. And by now, and there are 140 countries and 32 international organizations has joined the Belt Road Initiative. In effect, besides pursuing political and economical gains, China is also exporting its own development model to compete with the Western democratic system. So let's since the start of BRI, and there might be 2 main phases, and the phase 1 is from 2013 to 2016, was mostly about building infrastructure, the roads, railway, energy, facility, ports, and as well as many other infrastructure constructions. And the phase 2 from 2017 until now has been about adding sustainability into the mix. This means looking more carefully at environmental impact and the social risk, not just economical benefits. And so especially and in the first few years, and many BR projects and received a lot of complaint, especially those projects related to the extraction of natural resources involved in heavy pollution, or related to occupied local farmers' land, required resettlement, or continued investment in further fields that increased greenhouse gas emission. And most complaints related to China BRI project focus on following issues, such as insufficient stakeholder engagement in project development, and implementation, and impact assessment, and also inadequate information disclosure, and weak environmental impact assessment, and some violations of land rights and other human rights, and loss of livelihood and for affected communities, labor right concerns, pollution, and associated health risks. And previous speaker and Edwin and others also mentioned in their case sharing. And so it's very clear that the BRI project need more structure. That means it's the need a more structured and responsible approach, especially on social and environmental risk. And the Chinese policymaker also realized some early BRI project caused negative impact, and also that things had to change. So in the past few years, we have seen several policy shift pushing for greener investment. For example, the guidelines for building a green financial system issued by People's Bank of China and the Ministry of Finance, the National Development and Reform Commission, and the Ministry of Ecological Environment. The document basically set the tone for greener finance in China, and also globally, especially in Global South. And also another policy is the ecological and environmental protection guidelines for overseas investment project from the Minister of Ecological and Environment and the Ministry of Commerce, which lay out the environmental standards for Chinese company I expect to follow when they invest abroad. And the opinion on promoting green development of Belt Road project issued by National Development and Reform Commission, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of Ecological Environment, and the Minister of Commerce. And China also has the BRI Green Development Guidelines, often known as the traffic light system for Chinese overseas investment, developed by the Belt Road Initiative International Green Development Coalition, which is affiliated with China's Ministry of Ecological and Environment. And these guidelines help investors understand that what type of project are encouraged with the green light, allowed, but also some potential social and environmental issues with the yellow light, or discouraged with the red light. And one of the biggest milestone came in 2021 when China announced that it would stop supporting new overseas coal power plants. That's a very strong signal shown in that China's intention shift BRI toward low carbon development. And even with all these new green policies, there are still quite many challenges on the ground. So first is the grievance and accountability mechanism are still under development. A lot of communities don't really have a clear channel to raise concern or complaint, or they don't know who is responsible for following up. So when problem happen, it's not always easy for them to get support. And the second, local community engagement is too limited. Many projects don't involve local people early enough or deeply enough in planning and decision making. So this means risks are often not identified until much later, when the cost of fixing them is much higher. Third, transparency remains a major issue. Information about the project plan, finance, contractor, and environmental assessment is often not easily accessible. And without transparency, it's difficult for civil society, media, or even local authorities to monitor what is happening. And fourth, environmental impact are still not assessed thoroughly. And in some cases, environmental impact assessments are too general or not made public or completely only after construction has started. So it makes it harder to avoid or mitigate environmental harm. And finally, some projects still carry very high ecological risk, especially those involving mining, hydropower, larger industry zone, or project located near protected area or vulnerable ecosystem. And even with the green guidelines, the implementation is most of the time is very weak. This risk can become real problems. And so just want to give you a concrete example. In Indonesia, several Chinese mining companies are still building or investing in captive coal-fired power plant inside industry parks, even after China announced in 2021 that it would stop building new coal power plants overseas. And local Indonesia NGOs and communities are very concerned. They worried about the environmental impact, the air, water pollution, and the ecological risk that came with the new and ongoing coal project. They have raised this concern to Chinese mining company, to Chinese banks providing financing, and even to Chinese government and the Chinese embassy in Indonesia. But so far, they haven't received any meaningful response, and the construction of this captive coal power plant continues. So this example really shows that even with strong green policies on paper, what matters just as much is actually implementation on the ground. And so to wrap up, we can see that the Belt Road Initiative is definitely moving in a more sustainable direction, and at least on paper. And the policy framework is getting stronger, especially with the new guidelines on green finance and environmental protection. That's a very positive shift. But at the same time, environmental and social governance still need to catch up. Policies alone are not enough. Implementation on the ground has to improve. We also need a stronger and more constant green standard across all overseas investment. Different ministry, banks, and companies sometimes follow different rules, so aligning these standards will be a key. Another important area is grievance and accountability mechanism. Communities need a clear, accessible way to raise concern, and they deserve timely, meaningful response. Finally, better dialogue between Chinese investor and local civil society is essential. When company, government, NGO, and communities talk early and openly, risk can be identified soon, and trust probably can be built, and the project are much more likely to succeed in a sustainable way. Okay, that's just my very brief sharing about the BRI, and I will be very glad to continue the dialogue and also to seek any potential cooperation with the civil society in Global South. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Zhong. And that was a really useful overview, and to a certain extent answers one of the questions we have in the chat about whether, for instance, the conditions on the ground in Peru are known inside China or among Chinese NGOs. But we'll have an opportunity to talk specifically about that in the Q&A. And a reminder, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A segment. We have a couple that have accumulated. But before we get to question and answers, I'd like to bring on Paulina. And Paulina works with Latinoamérica Sustentable, and one of the organizations that Maia was talking about that tracks the Chinese investments throughout Latin America. And Paulina, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I am the director of Latinoamérica Sustentable, which is an organization, a small organization, 6 people that work full-time in Ecuador, in Bolivia, and the United States. We have a network of consultants from a lot of nations that help us to accomplish our work. We are the only organization, I think, that has a focus, exclusive focus in Chinese investment overseas. And we do this because the importance of China as a developer and of projects is huge, mostly in sensible companies, and that they go and invest in very sensitive regions. So our work is cooperate to organizations, communities that are affected by these Chinese projects, and we also work with the investment group from China, human rights, syntax, as Maia said, to find evidence. And this group was founded in 2020. We are more than 10 organizations, and sometimes we conform this group in Mexico. So Latinoamérica Sustentable has also established a group to work about these companies, and we have 17 organizations that have as a purpose to do these follow-ups also with the banks. We have 4 areas where we work: banks and companies. We investigate with the ESG systems with the Chinese banks, and we also monitor Chinese projects that are emblematic in that have to do with extractive infrastructure and energy. We also do follow-ups and socialize the policies from the Chinese to be fulfilled. And we also work with the construction of bridges between China and Latin America. We've been in China. We've met some of the people that work in terms of financial, international financing, and also academics in China that are interested in social issues, and also representatives of banks and other state departments. Latinoamérica Sustentable, it's a center of resources. How some of the other participants have explained, work with investments, with Chinese investment. It's hard because of the culture, the language, the distance, but also because of this hard to access information or create spaces to dialogue with the companies. This work requires a lot of resources that sometimes the communities or the organizations, they do not have the possibility to invest on these efforts. So we can, and that we can dedicate all our energy to research, to promote, has given us the resources and the information to be able to put it there out for the community and organizations that want to include this research about this Chinese investment and what is the impact in also regarding the state information. And now a lot of organizations are including this information when they face these new actors in the territory. I'm going to give some examples of what we do. For example, last year we published a guideline of Chinese investment and what is incident in Latin America, and it's in Spanish. It also offers a toolbox with institutions, the requirements, Chinese requirements to approve projects. Also explains the role of the banks, of the private companies, and also offers a series of advices or recommendations to. We also have another of our emblematic topics when we started in 2014, which has to do with the research of environmental and guidelines or policies in China. So there are many of these guidelines for the bank, for the companies, for Chinese companies in the mining sector, for example, that are not being implemented how Zhao indicated, and that are unknown. So it is an obstacle for these organizations to demand that those guidelines are implemented. We have made compilations of these guidelines. We also update these guidelines every 2 years. And now we're very happy to say that next year, the beginning of next year, we will publish a tool that we have been working on. We call it the tool of the key concepts. We have reviewed a lot of Chinese guidelines and identified elements that are very important to defend the territory and to defend communities. For example, some of the topics of environmental studies, labor rights, complaint mechanisms. So all these concepts are present in many of these guidelines. So with this tool, the people that are interested on know more about this, they just have to write debida diligencia, and then you get all the list of all the articles where all these concepts are in this, and you can identify them in the Chinese guidelines. And this is good for the organizations so they can take advantage of this information to include these commitments in their work.
So this year we did some research that we called corporate mapping of projects, and we're going to publish a couple of cases next year. And the idea of these corporate mapping is to be able to understand what the Chinese companies that are participating in the project, how they are located within the large Chinese conglomerates that these companies belong to. What are the shareholders? What are the banks? that have provided credits to develop these different projects. And with those projects, and they're extractive projects, to see how the products and the materials and resources that have been extracted from these projects, how they operate, how they are developed up to the commercialization and the supply chain. So this is really important because it gives us information that's very useful when it comes to building strategies for incidents in these different areas. So in Sustainable Latin America, we work a lot in the field. We make visits in the territory to different projects. We go and accompany technical people with attorneys, with engineers, and of course with communities to do research and to confirm and to analyze information about environmental and impacts. This work is really important because we are able to sustain our work, which is expressed through different letters and reports that are sent to different Chinese institutions, not only to companies and banks, but also to entities that are responsible for supervising and monitoring Chinese investments. In our time of operations, we have sent more than 200 letters and more than 50 documents to these different institutions. It's really difficult to get responses from these institutions. I mean, generally, we receive them very not often, but we do receive contacts and through friends that understand more about the Chinese institutions, that these letters are actually being read and they are being taken into account, and that they are a very important input for the progress that we are seeing when it comes to the creation of governance and social impacts within Chinese institutions. So our work also has a lot to do with research, which are sometimes done individually, other times they are collaborative. This year, we published the first report about environmental defenders, which has been addressed to Chinese banks, which was work that has been based on in interviews and an analysis of all of the environmental framework from banks that made loans to a mining project in Ecuador. A few years ago, we published the very first report in Spanish about the Chinese Development Bank, which is the largest development bank in the world and the main financier of fossil fuels projects, and also the largest Chinese lender in Latin America. But the name is something that people don't even recognize, especially in the communities that have financing in Latin America. So we also see that these institutions need to be known by everyone, and so we can generate narratives about these different institutions. The last example that I have here is a work that we did here with SIGDA, which is other organizations. This is a report for the periodic universal examination, which we've done on 2 different occasions. And in these reports, which we present as shadow reports, as research that we've done to more than 26 different Chinese projects that have been developed in Latin America. And we've added that as additional information for when it comes to human rights. Finally, we also seek out opportunities for engagement with Chinese stakeholders, where we do our research. We try to reach all those different levels, and we have had the opportunity to be invited by different Chinese institutions that include universities. I would like to tell you a little bit more about the story of 2 of the pictures that you can see here. This is a meeting that was held in October in Ecuador with one of the vice presidents of the Chamber of Mining of China, the first visit in Ecuador. And this person had the possibility to meet with Ecuadorian organizations to be able to present our concerns about several Chinese projects that are being developed in Ecuador. After that, you can see this photo that is from a visit that we organized with an Argentinian organization in 2016. This was the very first visit by an organization, a Latin American organization, to be able to present a case of one Chinese investment facing environmental organizations, Chinese environmentalist organizations, and several academic figures as well. So here you can see this is a picture that was outside of the offices of Shugen to deliver a letter in person. I would also like to talk to you a little bit about the suggestion by John Martinez about the need to take all of the issues of what's happened with Toromoncho, which Edwin told us about, and also to tell you a little bit that we have been working, hand in hand to provide the first case of the dialogue mechanism that was implemented by the Chinese Metal and Mineral Chamber. And when this was first put together, and that mechanism accepts claims, grievances from affected communities. This is a mechanism that is not fully established. They're still receiving pilot projects. And for the case of the 5 families that shared, Edwin has been prepared. They were shared last year with this dialogue mechanism from the Chamber of Mining. Yesterday, they confirmed that they received the case and the commitment of the chamber to review the information, and they will confirm whether it's going to be accepted and reviewed by the mining chamber. So that's the end of my presentation. I'd like to thank you again for the opportunity to share information about our work. The idea is also of these opportunities is for us to get to know each other and to build a community for exchanging reflections, actions from Sustainable Latin America. We're really happy to be part of this and to share everything that has to do with other organizations as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulina. That was wonderful. We really got a nice picture of what your organization has been doing and the network it has really strengthened on this work. On the question of Q&A, on our questions that we've been accumulating, I want to start with a kind of double question because they're related. There was a question about whether it might be possible to map those areas where the United States in particular and China in particular are competing over particular resources in particular areas. That might be in Congo, for instance, or it might be rare earth element in Brazil. And so whether that might be an interesting follow-up. And then the related question was sometimes China partners with Western companies in particular areas, and maybe that too would be an interesting example of follow-ups. I'm going to start by asking Mariana whether that might be an interesting thing to do.
Thank you, John. Maybe we can also add Joan. Can we bring him from the panelists, from the participants to the panel? Because he's also one of the founders of the Environmental Justice Atlas, and he has also been working on Chinese investments with Xi Jinping and other conflicts. So first of all, I put it in the chat, but if you visit the Environmental Justice Atlas and you go to the right where it says browse maps, you can actually see an entrance that says companies, and you can see the number of conflicts related to different companies. So you could actually there quickly have a glance and try to see, okay, what companies involve US funds. But I think sometimes it's less clear than with Chinese investments. So we see that many projects have different investments from actually. It is possible to have projects that involve Chinese and US investments in some, US capitals, let's say, from US investors. Joanne, do you want to add on this US-Chinese map that could be built? I think the challenge would be what would be the US markers, let's say, in all the conflicts we have in the Atlas?
Well, I think it's not only, well, as John was saying, that there is competition, but also I think there is quite often the companies, either they buy shares in the other companies
Exactly.
or they swallow up the other companies. So, for instance, more than the US, I think with Canada, this happens quite often. There is in Ecuador a place called Varinza with a copper mine in the Amazon. And this, quite recently, Xi Jinping has bought this. I don't know whether just bought or just bought some shares in the former company. So I think there is much more, well, as all companies around the world. I don't think the Chinese are different. I think they're quite similar in their behavior, which is to make money by extractivism and not just money to help the thing, to help the world economy, because unless we get copper and coal and oil and so on, the economy does not work. According to them, we could have another different economy, but this is what happens. So they are all the time going to the what we call the commodity extraction frontiers. And then if they can do it themselves, they do it themselves. If not, they get together with other companies which are already there. So I don't think we should exaggerate. I think the geopolitical competition, this happens between the states perhaps, but at the level of the companies, they are quite, I wouldn't say friendly, but they know that they have to cooperate. And they buy shares. So if you buy shares, for instance, Sumitomo has, 30% of the shares of Xi Jinping belong to Sumitomo, which is from Japan. So I would emphasize this. And also from the point of view of us, like activists trying to make visible and helping the people complaining, I think it's good to realize that there is this kind of common actions quite often.
Excellent.
So that's my
Thank you.
opinion
Yes.
about this.
That's a very valuable contribution because, we talked about this a year ago when we came together, when we first put forward the principle that we wanted to reduce tensions between the United States and China. We wanted to make sure that we did not encourage collaboration at the expense of communities in the global South. In other words, either the United States as a government and Chinese government working together to extract more material from the global South, or as you point out, the companies themselves collaborating on this larger extractivist project. And I think if we certainly can look at the modalities of a map to see if we can bring out this question of cooperation versus competition, but certainly we can also write about it, and I think that would make a very interesting article with the data that you're suggesting. I want to ask the second question, which is really about the degree to which the violations or the impact, let's just say the impact of Chinese investments in particular communities, and of course we were talking about the copper mine in Toromocho. How much is that known among Chinese public and Chinese NGOs? Paulina said, of course, that there are official grievance mechanisms to present the information to Chinese government representatives, but how much is this known within the Chinese public sphere and among Chinese NGOs? And of course, Zhao works for a Chinese NGO, so let's go first to him to get an answer.
Okay, yeah, thanks for the question. And to be honest, and most of Chinese NGOs, we know a lot thing about the environmental and human rights violation in Peru, in Latin America, and other countries. First is because of information gap, and most of the information and is very difficult for Chinese NGO to access, and because we are mostly depends on the information all from the media and the social media and on Chinese media and social media. And most of the information is about propaganda, how Chinese overseas investment is helping with those countries to improve their economy and help local people to be rich, but very limited information about the negative impact of this information. And the second is the language barrier, and still most of many Chinese people couldn't understand English, and also very few could understand Spanish. So that's also something. So my organization is working on. First is to try to translate some materials, report from Spanish and English into Chinese, and the second try to disseminate this report and information on our organization's social medias, and try to more and more Chinese public can access different voice, different information related to Chinese overseas investment. So, for example, if they Google some project name in Chinese, maybe most of the information is Chinese government or companies agreement with local partners. But if we can release and publish more information, and the Chinese audience after the Google searching or Chinese Google called Baidu searching, they can find neutral or different information. And also one case we just done together with Maria is about hardware. It's an armed attack to a hydropower station in Chile, the north of San Diego. Because when I do some online research, I couldn't find many information in Chinese about the uh, local communities' resilience to this project and the local protects against this program for more than 10 years. So I collect some information from Spanish and English and write some write a comprehensive summary of the program in Chinese, and publish it in our social media. We just want to this case can be known by more Chinese. So that's just one specific cases, and also there's so many cases related to Chinese overseas investment. It couldn't be done by one organization or one people. We also want to encourage more Chinese NGOs and pay the attention to these issues, and also involved in the global campaign against the critical mineral issues and further field issues.
Excellent, thank you. We have three big questions from Jia Keek, and I want to get to those. But I first want to ask Edwin, what your experience, Edwin, has been interacting with Chinese authorities, Chinese companies, because that is also part of this question. It's not only how much of the information is known in China or is known in Chinese NGOs. It's also about how much contact you have, how much of a conversation you have with Chinese representatives. And I think that's something we'd like to hear from you. We've heard a little bit from some of the other presenters about the language difficulties, the cultural gap. But since we have you here, Edwin, I'd love to hear more directly from you.
Thank you, John. So unfortunately, that's one of the major weaknesses that we have to how can we have contact with the Chinese authorities. Unfortunately, in Peru, the Chinese authorities where they're working are actually Peruvians, and the representatives are probably in China, and they don't really know what's happening within our territory, but they are only base it on certain functions that they have. One when it comes to language, because of the language barrier. And then another thing is that these are workers. I mean, Chinaco has a whole group of workers, and the workers in Peru, at least, the big problem is that you have services. And so with the Fujimori government, everything that has to do with services have to be reserved. You have it's a subcontract, and we don't know who we really need to complain against. And so that's when we see work accidents that happen or any sort of problem that comes up. Nobody really knows. They evade their liability in a million different ways. And so it's a serious problem. And then the second thing is that we have these revolving doors. And so I think that within the Peruvian government, when the civil society, when we look at like different mining projects, we say this is not okay. And so this state official, knows that later they're going to be an official for the very company, and so they give everything a green light. And so we even have politicians that are involved. And so for Chinarco, even the former president Humala was already involved in this. And so this is a major problem because they're not interested in the natural resources. What they're interested in is money at the cost of people's lives and livelihood. And so this is a real problem that we're facing. So for us, it's really important, and that's why we've been working with these different organizations with SIGDA to see these mechanisms to see. We don't know, a lot about that process, and they help us out a lot. Like Paulina was telling us, these complaint mechanisms to at least find out for certain different cases. We've sent, letters so that they can tell us, what is going on with the risks that are being caused by these projects when it comes to human resources.
Thank you, Edwin. That's very, very helpful. We only have a little bit of time, and of course we have big questions and a little bit of time, and I'm going to ask both Maia and Paulina to answer the hard questions. You're very lucky people. And the hard question, I'll kind of boil it down, is we've talked a bit about the US and China as governments and of course corporate interests. But the larger question is about the institutions of the global economy, and to what extent, for instance, the World Bank and the other kind of lending institutions at an international level. I'm not talking about the Chinese lending authorities or the US lending authorities, but the World Bank and other global institutions. How are they either encouraging this extractivism or encouraging competition? How are they interacting? And let me start by asking Paulina, because you did refer a little bit to the World Bank in your presentation.
I wasn't really talking about the World Bank. I was talking about the Asian Investment Bank for Infrastructure, which is the twin bank to the World Bank. It's a bank that's international, but being its main the one who's really pushing for things in China. And so we don't study multilateral banks, but what I can tell you is a few things. In the past, we saw some efforts between the World Bank and Chinese political banks, and so where they could have the opportunity to share knowledge about safeguards and environmental governance systems. There were several different training events and exchange that the banks would have to share information, and especially for training on of their employees at these Chinese banks. And so we have not heard about these kind of collaborations recently. So we're really concerned about the fact that the multilateral bank in Latin America has a really strong discourse about not improving their environmental standards because they become less competitive, and they become less competitive because they are competing with Chinese institutions that have no environmental safeguards in any way, shape, or form. And so there's a race to the bottom. I also don't see much collaboration when it comes to loans, syndical loans, where, and here I'm talking about Western banks, Chinese banks, and these spaces can be an opportunity for improving training when it comes to environmental safeguard systems. We are not seeing, at least personally, I haven't seen any cases, maybe, one in Colombia where the Inter-American Development Bank and the Chinese Development Bank were working, but it's not a common thing to see. And I think that it's less and less as the days go by. And so we're very concerned because there are really important initiatives that are really moving ahead with the support of Brazil to be really able to push forward connectivity, infrastructure, especially when we talk about road infrastructure and transportation for South America, with the idea of being able to join the two oceans and to be able to share natural resources toward Asia. However, the banks are each talking in their own space. There is no place where they are, coming together, where they're thinking collectively about the environmental needs, social needs of their projects, requirements, local populations. Every bank comes in with their own strategy, their own loan, and with the potential of causing really major damages to certain ecosystems and with no coordination between them. And so, I mean, that's a comment that I can make for you.
Thank you, Paulina. And Maya will give
Um,
you the last word here. And anything you want to add to Paulina's comments about this kind of horrendous race to the bottom that we are seeing?
Thank you. Yeah, but we see the weakening of the multilateral institutions and weakness because there's no financing or less financing, and it's also the influence is reduced in a world where more hegemonic poles are emerging, multipolar world. We see competition, and as South global countries that they want to access all these resources, the resources that we produce in South America. We have the competition between the initiative and the Chinese road and the global way. For example, green hydrogen and critical materials, the extraction of critical materials. We also have the competition between the multilateral banks that have strengthened and some new institutions, financial institutions have appeared, like the Asian Investment Bank, and also the new developmental bank connected to the BRICS, and they are competing in our region. For example, the program South Connection for the interconnection and digital and logistic of the South American, that it's being followed by international banks by big, but also with the Asian Bank. And we don't see if there is consultation of if they follow the same objectives. So as a region, we're like a cow where they can extract as much as they want, and that weakens the standards in the practice. In the speech is different, but in the practice, the standards of information to information access and participation are weakening, and many times these initiatives create these impacts and these risks, and this is our perspective. I want to say something.
Muy corto, por favor.
Just it's not only the banks and the companies, but it's also the people, the civil society. So there's a topic of the translation, but here is fine because there's somebody translating here. But besides censorship, it goes out. But then in Peru you have Grenco, you have it in Spinout, which is from Switzerland. We can go to Switzerland protest, but they don't care. They are about the profit. But openly we could take into the law to this company Greco. In Peru, the copper, it's Chinalco and other companies, Chinese companies. We should be able, and I don't do that much. Paulina and Mariana, they're trying to put this information in China. But this group that that are here, our work is to bring students or organizations from China that are better informed and they can just tell what's happening with these Chinese companies outside of China. So I think this is the main homework. Maybe we can't do it from Washington because it wouldn't look good, but from another more neutral place and direct this to China because we're all human. There's no difference between what people can do to protest to their own against their own companies and their own government.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Well, the most important thing is we have homework. Tarea. We have lots of homework that we need to do. But I want to thank all of us, all of the presenters for their wonderful presentations, and I want to thank the audience for showing up. We'll send a recording out to everybody, and we will continue to do this work, both in our separate organizations, but also collectively. And I think this project was an opportunity, as many people have pointed out, to build our cooperative work together, to build our trust in working together. And I think we have our homework. So